The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, by Edward Gibbon. Introduction. Host. Imagine, for a moment, you're a young man. It's the year 1764. You're sitting in Rome, among the ruins of the ancient capital, as the last rays of the sun paint the stones in shades of gold and purple. Barefoot friars are singing their evening prayers in a temple that once belonged to Jupiter. All around you is the ghost of the greatest empire the world has ever known, a ghost of unimaginable power and grandeur, now silent, crumbling, and reclaimed by nature. It was right there, in that exact moment of quiet awe, that a young English gentleman named Edward Gibbon first conceived the idea for a work that would consume the next 20 years of his life. He decided he would write the story not of Rome's glory, but of its fall. What a task! What an almost impossible ambition! The book he would eventually write, The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, wasn't just a history book. It became one of the most praised, most studied, and most monumental works of literature ever written. It is a book that doesn't just tell you what happened, it invites you to sit with the author and watch the slow, majestic, and often tragic sunset of a civilization. Gibbon was not a professional historian in the way we think of one today. He was what was once called an amateur, in the truest sense of the word, a lover. He was a man who fell in love with his subject. He wasn't driven by a university degree or a political agenda, but by a deep, passionate curiosity to understand one of the most profound questions in all of history. How does something so great, so powerful, so seemingly eternal, fall apart? Over the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you the heart of his answer. This isn't just a summary, it's an invitation to explore the epic story that Gibbon laid out over thousands of pages. We're going to journey together across 13 centuries, from the sun-drenched peace of Rome's golden age to the final, desperate moments of its last emperor. And I promise you this, by the end of our time together, you will not only understand the key reasons why Rome fell, but you will also hold a mirror up to our own world. You will see that the story of Rome is, in many ways, the story of us. It is a timeless lesson on power, corruption, the clash of ideas, and the slow, invisible forces that can bring even the mightiest giants to their knees. This is more than a history lesson. It's a journey into the heart of civilization itself. So, settle in, and let's begin. Book summary. To understand how an empire falls, you must first understand what it was at its height. And that is where our story begins. In the 2nd century after Christ, during the age of the emperors known as the Antonines, the Roman Empire was at peace. It stretched from the misty hills of Britain to the sandy deserts of Syria, from the Rhine and Danube rivers in the north to the Nile in Egypt. It was, as Gibbon describes it, the fairest part of the earth and the most civilized portion of mankind. The rule of law, refined manners, and a common language had knitted together hundreds of different cultures and provinces into a single, vast community. This was a world governed by a remarkable idea. The emperor, a single man, held absolute power, but he ruled under the guise of an ancient republic. He was not a king, but the first citizen, and he governed with the consent of the Senate. For more than 80 years, under the wise and virtuous leadership of emperors like Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius, this system worked beautifully. It was a golden age of peace, prosperity, and order. The legions, the finest army the world had ever seen, were stationed on the frontiers, not as conquerors, but as guardians. It was the stated policy of the emperors not to expand the empire, but to maintain its existing borders, believing it was already as large as it could ever hope to govern effectively. But even in this golden age, the seeds of its own decay were being sown. The long peace, Gibbon argues, created a slow and secret poison. The fire of genius, the spirit of military discipline, and the courage of a free people began to fade. The provinces, long defended by a professional army, grew soft and forgot the art of war. They received their laws and governors from a distant sovereign and trusted their safety to mercenary soldiers. A languid indifference to public life began to creep into the heart of the empire. And then came the turning point. After the death of the philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius, the throne passed to his son, Commodus. And with Commodus, the Age of Iron began. Unlike his 5 great predecessors, Commodus was a tyrant born not of ambition, but of weakness, vanity, and cruelty. He had no interest in governing. His passions were for the brutal sports of the amphitheater. He disgraced himself by fighting as a gladiator in the arena, and his reign was a 13-year-long spectacle of blood and luxury. His paranoia led him to execute many of the most honorable senators, and he ruled not through wisdom, but through fear and his corrupt favorites. The murder of Commodus was a temporary relief, but it opened the door to a century of chaos. The throne of the world was now for sale. The Praetorian Guards, the elite soldiers of the capital, auctioned off the empire to the highest bidder in a shameful public sale. This single act revealed a fatal weakness that had been growing for years. The civil authority was now powerless against the military. The armies on the frontiers, in Britain, Syria, and along the Danube, refused to accept this bargain. Their generals, all men of ambition and ability, declared war on the murderers of the emperor and, more importantly, on each other. This was the beginning of the great unraveling. The civil wars that followed were not just about who would be emperor. They were a symptom of a deeper sickness. The very idea of the Roman Republic, the principle that the emperor was merely the first magistrate serving the Senate and the people, was dying. It was being replaced by a starker, harsher reality, a military despotism, where the will of the soldiers was the only law that mattered. A man from Africa, Septimius Severus, emerged as the victor from these bloody civil wars. He was a stern and effective soldier, and he restored order to the empire. But it was a new kind of order. He was a pure monarch who ruled without the old disguises. He had no patience for the Senate, which he disdained, and he governed through the open power of the sword. He famously advised his sons, enriched the soldiers, and despised the rest. This was the new maxim of the Roman Empire. He increased the pay of the legions, relaxed their discipline, and taught them to see their own power. His reign marked the final, decisive shift from the ghost of the old republic to an absolute monarchy founded on military force. The decline was not a sudden collapse, but a slow, grinding process, punctuated by moments of terror and brief periods of recovery. The century that followed Severus was one of almost constant turmoil. Emperors rose and fell with shocking speed, often murdered by the very soldiers who had raised them to the throne. Civil war became a permanent feature of Roman life. The empire was an irregular republic, as one writer put it, where the military created and deposed its magistrates at will. During this crisis of the 3rd century, the empire nearly fell apart completely. Barbarian tribes, the Goths, the Franks, the Alemanni, poured across the frontiers, which were often left undefended as the legions marched against each other. The province of Gaul was overrun. The Goths launched naval expeditions from the Black Sea, sacking cities in Asia Minor and even in Greece. For a time, the empire was split into 3 warring pieces, with independent rulers in Gaul and in the east. It was in this desperate moment that a series of remarkable soldiers from the province of Illyricum, men like Claudius Gothicus, Aurelian, and Probus, rose from the ranks to save the state. They were warriors of the old Roman stamp, men of discipline, courage, and relentless energy. Aurelian, in a reign of just 5 years, defeated the Goths, drove the Alemanni out of Italy, and reunited the splintered empire, conquering the breakaway kingdoms of both Gaul and the East. He recognized that even Rome itself was no longer safe, and he built the great new walls that still surround the city today. a powerful symbol that the empire was now on the defensive. But these Illyrian peasants, for all their strength, were military despots. They had saved the empire, but they could not restore its old soul. The man who would give the dying empire its final, definitive form was Diocletian. Like his predecessors, Diocletian was a soldier of humble birth. He understood that the empire was too vast and too troubled to be governed by a single man. So he divided it. He created a system of 4 rulers, the Tetrarchy, 2 senior emperors with the title of Augustus, and 2 junior partners with the title of Caesar. He hoped this would provide for an orderly succession and allow an emperor to be present on every threatened frontier. He himself ruled the east, while his colleague Maximian ruled the west. Diocletian also stripped away the last fictions of the old republic. He was no longer the first citizen, he was the dominus, the lord. He adopted the elaborate ceremonies of the Persian court, the diadem, the purple robes, and the practice of prostration. He separated the civil and military administrations to prevent any single governor from becoming too powerful. His reforms were harsh but effective. They imposed a rigid order on the empire, but at a tremendous cost. Taxes became crushing and were collected with brutal efficiency to support 4 imperial courts and a massive bureaucracy. Society became stratified, with many professions made hereditary by law. The empire was saved, but it was transformed into a gilded cage. And it was in the midst of this rigid, oppressive new order that one of the most profound revolutions in human history reached its tipping point. For 3 centuries, a new religion had been quietly spreading through the empire, Christianity. At first, it was an obscure sect among the Jews, but its message of salvation and eternal life, offered to all people, slave or free, Roman or barbarian, had a power that the old pagan religions could not match. The Christians were different. Their zeal was exclusive and intolerant. While a Roman might worship Jupiter, Isis, and a dozen other local gods, a Christian declared that all gods but his own were demons. This set them apart. They were seen as atheists, as haters of the human race, and their secret meetings bred suspicion. They were persecuted, but the persecutions were often local, sporadic, and driven more by popular anger than by imperial policy. The calm indifference of Rome's rulers was occasionally broken by bursts of severity, like the infamous persecution of Nero, who blamed the Christians for the Great Fire of Rome, or the empire-wide persecutions under Decius and Diocletian, who saw the church as a state within a state, a threat to the unity of the empire. But persecution only strengthened the church. The blood of the martyrs, as one of them famously said, was the seed of the faith. Their belief in a future life made them fearless in the face of death, and their strong, organized community, their network of bishops and their system of charity, supported them through every trial. The final and greatest persecution, under Diocletian, was a furious but failed attempt to eradicate the faith. And just a few years after it ended, the entire situation was reversed by one man, Constantine. Constantine was not the saint the church later made him out to be. He was a soldier, a man of towering ambition, and perhaps a man of genuine, if complex, faith. As he marched to fight his rival Maxentius for control of Italy and Rome, he saw a vision, or so the story goes. He saw a cross in the sky, with the words, "By this sign, you shall conquer." He ordered the Christian symbol to be painted on his soldiers' shields, and he won the decisive battle at the Milvian Bridge. Maxentius was drowned in the Tiber, and Constantine became the master of the West. From that moment on, Constantine became the protector of the Christians. With the Edict of Milan, he granted universal religious toleration, but he lavished his favor on the church. He built magnificent basilicas, gave privileges to the clergy, and presided over their councils. He then turned his arms against his last rival, Licinius, and reunited the entire empire under his rule. He was the sole master of the Roman world, and his victory was the victory of the Christian Church. He moved the capital of the empire from Rome to a new city he built on the Bosphorus, a new Rome, which he named after himself, Constantinople. It was a Christian capital, free from the pagan temples and traditions of the old city. The conversion of Constantine did not save the Roman Empire. In fact, Gibbon argues, it may have hastened its decline. The new faith, with its focus on the afterlife, discouraged the active virtues of society. The clergy preached patience and pusillanimity. Wealth was diverted to the church and to monasteries. The most pressing questions for the emperors became not military strategy, but theological disputes, like the great Arian controversy over the nature of Christ, which split the empire into warring factions. After Constantine's death, the empire was divided among his 3 weak and cruel sons, who soon turned on each other. The house of Constantine was consumed by a series of bloody family massacres, until only one heir remained, Julian. Known to history as Julian the Apostate, he was a philosopher who had been raised a Christian but secretly converted back to the old pagan faith. When he became emperor, he declared a policy of toleration, but he did everything in his power to undermine Christianity and restore the worship of the ancient gods. He tried to rebuild the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, a project that was, according to contemporary accounts, stopped by a series of miracles, including fiery eruptions from the foundations. But his reign was short. He was killed in a war against Persia, and with his last breath, the dream of a pagan restoration died. The final blow to the Western Roman Empire came not from within, but from without. The late 4th century saw the arrival of a new terror out of the East, the Huns. A nomadic people of unparalleled ferocity and ugliness, they burst out of the plains of Scythia, driving all before them. The Goths, a powerful Germanic nation who had settled on the banks of the Danube, were terrified. An entire nation, hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children, appeared as suppliants on the Roman frontier, begging to be allowed across the river to find refuge within the empire. The Emperor Valens, in a fateful decision, granted their prayer. But his corrupt and greedy officials then abused and starved them. They sold the Goths dogs to eat at exorbitant prices and took their children as slaves in exchange for bread. Driven to desperation, the Goths rose in rebellion. Valens marched against them, and in the disastrous Battle of Hadrianople in the year 378, the Roman army was annihilated and the emperor himself was killed. This was a wound from which the empire would never recover. The Goths, now an independent and victorious nation within the empire's borders, ravaged the provinces. The great Emperor Theodosius, a Spaniard chosen by the young Emperor Gratian to rule the East, managed to pacify them, not by defeating them, but by settling them as allies within the empire. They became foederati, barbarian soldiers serving Rome under their own chiefs. It was a dangerous solution. The Roman army was now filled with Germans, Goths, and Franks. The masters of the world had forgotten how to fight their own battles. The final act came in the next generation. After the death of Theodosius, the empire was permanently divided between his 2 young and feeble sons, Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west. Honorius, a prince who cared more for his pet chickens than for his people, abandoned Rome and hid himself in the inaccessible fortress of Ravenna. When the legions of Britain revolted and Gaul and Spain were lost to usurpers, the defense of Italy fell to one man, Stilicho, a Vandal general in Roman service. He was a brilliant commander who defeated the Goths under their great king, Alaric, and repelled another massive invasion of barbarians. But the court of Honorius, poisoned by jealousy, grew suspicious of the powerful general. Stilicho, the only man who could save Rome, was accused of treason and executed. With Stilicho gone, the road to Rome was open. In the year 410, Alaric and his Goths marched into the heart of Italy and laid siege to the ancient capital. For the first time in 800 years, an enemy was at the gates. The city, weakened by famine and plague, was betrayed. The gates were opened, and the Goths poured in. The sack of Rome was not a total destruction, but it was a psychological blow that echoed across the world. The eternal city, the queen of the world, had been violated. The final half-century of the Western Empire was a slow, agonizing death. Real power was in the hands of barbarian generals like Aetius, who famously defeated Attila the Hun at the Battle of Chalon. But emperors were made and unmade in the palace, a succession of pathetic phantoms. The Vandals, under their king Genseric, crossed from Spain into Africa, the breadbasket of Italy, and conquered it. From Carthage, they built a fleet and, in 455, sacked Rome a second time, a pillage far more destructive than that of the Goths. Finally, in the year 476, the last act was played. The barbarian mercenaries in Italy demanded land, a third of the estates of the Italians. When their demand was refused, their leader, Odoacer, revolted. He deposed the last emperor of the West, a young boy ironically named Romulus Augustulus. Odoacer did not bother to create a new puppet emperor. He simply sent the imperial insignia, the diadem and the purple robe, to the emperor in Constantinople, and declared that the West no longer needed an emperor of its own. And so, without drama, without a great final battle, the Roman Empire in the West came to an end. It did not fall with a bang, but with a whimper. It was not conquered, it simply faded away. Gibbon's grand story shows us that there was no single cause. It was a slow, complex decay of 1,000 years. It was the loss of public virtue, the rise of military despotism, the pressures of barbarian migrations, the divisions of civil war, and the profound social transformation brought by a new religion. It was a long, slow sunset, and the world was left in the twilight. Commentary. So, what are we to make of this immense, almost overwhelming story, a tale that spans over 1,000 years and covers the known world? It can feel distant, like a story of gods and giants, not of men. But that is the magic of Gibbon. He shows us that this wasn't the work of fate or gods, it was the work of people. People driven by the same passions that drive us today: ambition, fear, greed, love, and the search for meaning. The first, and perhaps most powerful, lesson Gibbon leaves us with is about the fragility of order. The Roman peace, the Pax Romana, seems so solid in retrospect. For centuries, it provided a framework of law, commerce, and security for millions. But it rested on a delicate balance, between the civil and the military, between the center and the provinces, between the emperor and the idea of the republic. When that balance was broken, it didn't just collapse, it corroded from the inside out. The slow decay of military discipline, the rise of a government that cared more for its own survival than for the public good, the crushing weight of taxes that destroyed the very prosperity it was meant to protect, these are not ancient problems. They are timeless warnings. They remind us that civilization is a garden, not a fortress. It must be tended constantly, or the weeds of corruption and disorder will inevitably reclaim it. The second great theme is the immense, unpredictable power of ideas. Gibbon famously described the fall of Rome as the triumph of barbarism and religion. He saw the rise of Christianity not as a salvation, but as one of the key forces that weakened the empire. In his view, it turned the minds of men away from their duties to the state and towards the pursuit of a heavenly kingdom. It replaced the active, public virtues of a Roman citizen with the passive, private virtues of a monk. Now, you don't have to agree with his conclusion. Many have argued that Christianity provided the social glue that held Europe together after the empire fell apart. But what is undeniable is that a new idea, born in an obscure corner of Judea, completely remade the world. It shows us that the most powerful force in history is not an army or an emperor, but a belief. A belief can build new worlds and tear old ones down. So what can you, a curious and ambitious 17-year-old on the cusp of your own life, take from this ancient story? First, understand that systems matter more than goals. The Romans were masters of setting goals, conquering a province, winning a war. But they failed when they neglected the systems that supported those goals, the systems of justice, of discipline, of civic virtue. It's a powerful lesson for your own life. It's not enough to want to be successful. You must build the daily habits and systems that make success almost inevitable. Second, be a student of human nature. Gibbon's history is a masterclass in understanding what drives people. He shows us emperors who were slaves to their passions and generals who were masters of them. He shows how vanity can destroy a wise man and how fear can make a fool dangerous. As you navigate your own life, in your relationships, in your future career, understanding the timeless patterns of human behavior will be one of your greatest assets. Read history, read biography, observe the world around you. See the patterns. Finally, don't take your world for granted. The Romans believed their empire was eternal. They couldn't imagine a world without it. And then, it was gone. We, too, live in a complex, interconnected world that seems permanent. But the story of Rome is a humbling reminder that nothing is permanent. All that we value, freedom, security, knowledge, art, is the product of generations of effort, and it can be lost far more easily than it was built. The best way to honor the legacy of the past is to take responsibility for the future. That was the story of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon. We've journeyed through the highlights today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary can only take you so far. The real magic, the true wisdom of this masterpiece, happens when you read it for yourself. It's in the quiet moments, when a particular story or a simple phrase from Gibbon's magnificent prose hits you in a way you didn't expect. This overview is designed to help you decide if this monumental work is worth your time. If anything we've talked about today has sparked your curiosity or resonated with you, I urge you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning history, it's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see the world, and your place in it. A link to the book is in the description. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together. Thank you for listening.